Good morning, and welcome to our Alaska Collaborative on Health and the Environment teleconference titled From Awareness to Action, Rethink the Pink, with Breast Cancer Action's Executive Director, Karuna Jaggar, and Board Member, Dr. Yamini Ranchod. We are excited to be bringing these two women who are deeply committed to achieving environmental health and justice to Anchorage next week for a free public event at the Lusac Library on Thursday, September 5th. And I'll be giving you some more event details towards the end of the call. My name is Diana DeFazio, and on behalf of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, I'll be facilitating today's call. CHE Alaska is a regional partnership group of the National Collaborative on Health and the Environment. CHE Alaska aims to advance knowledge and effective action to address growing concerns about the links between human health and environmental factors. You can find more information on our website at akaction.org and on the CHE National website, healthandenvironment.org. Karuna Jaggar has a slide presentation that we have converted to PDF. And so for those of you new to our CHE Alaska calls, this is an audio-only teleconference, not a webinar. So you will need to first download the document and then click through it to follow along. There's also a one-page outline of Yamini's talk, which you can download as our call will last 1 hour with time towards the end for discussion and for your questions. Each year, Alaska Community Action on Toxics, with support from the Alaska Run for Women, and in partnership with a number of other local organizations, brings leaders in breast cancer prevention to Alaska for public speaking engagements. This year, we are happy to host the two women you are about to hear from, Karuna and Yamini. I'd like to begin by introducing Karuna, as she will be speaking first. Karuna Jaggar is the Executive Director of Breast Cancer Action, BC Action, a national education and activist nonprofit organization working to achieve health justice for all women at risk of and living with breast cancer. Karuna is a leading voice challenging the status quo in the breast cancer industry and a go-to resource for the media when it comes to breast cancer issues. She's been published in the Washington Post, The Guardian, The New York Times, the LA Times, Ms. Magazine, and other national publications. And before joining Breast Cancer Action, Karuna's work focused on women's economic and social rights, and she was the first executive director for the East Bay Women's Initiative for Self-Employment. Karuna holds a master's degree in economic geography from UC Berkeley, with a special emphasis on women, gender, and sexuality, and she received her BA in philosophy from Smith College. Karuna is also an alumna of the Women's Policy Institute, a program of the Women's Foundation of California. A warm welcome to you, Karuna. You may go ahead and begin.
Thanks to all of you for joining us. I also just want to say how much I really value the CHE Network and ACAT, and it's really wonderful to have this invitation to come back to Anchorage next week. I have just enormous respect for and appreciation for the work that Pam and the entire ACAT team does on toxics, and really I want to highlight their work with community-led research. So let me begin by saying just a little bit about Breast Cancer Action for those of you that don't know our work. So this is slide 2, Independent Watchdog. So as you can see, we work in 3 main areas, and I'll really be talking about 2 of these today. Our work on screening, diagnosis, and treatment is absolutely at the core of our work, but I won't be talking about that unless it comes up in the discussion. So my focus is going to be on environmental exposures and pink ribbon culture and marketing, and how these really intersect and reinforce each other within the breast cancer industry. Next slide. Breast Cancer Action was founded in 1990, nearly 30 years ago. It was a small group of women living with and dying from breast cancer in the San Francisco Bay Area. They wanted answers about why they got breast cancer, how they could protect their daughters, granddaughters, and they wanted better treatments than the slash burn poison they were being offered. And that's really still the pillar of breast cancer treatment today. Our founders knew that their personal tragedies were part of a larger public health crisis. And from the very beginning, from the first flyer that they put out, calling together their first meeting, their goals were always education and political action. They built on the lessons from their friends and allies in the HIV/AIDS movement in the 1990s, and in their own words, they apprenticed themselves to ACT UP Golden Gate. nearly 30 years, our story has been a story of women coming together to achieve unlikely change, far bigger than what any one person could do on her own. And that's why I'm so glad that all of you have joined us today, because the power in people is really stronger than the people in power. And we need to remember that with all that we're up against. We need, next slide. So we need to use our power because virtually everyone knows someone who has been diagnosed with breast cancer, and yet most people don't think of the disease as a public health crisis. This year, it's estimated that 42,000 women will die from breast cancer. That's the size of a small town, and it's a number that's virtually unchanged since we were founded nearly 30 years ago. It's this fact that breast cancer is so commonplace that nearly 250,000 women are diagnosed each year that makes it a public health crisis and a critical women's health issue. And yet somehow pink ribbon culture has made the disease palatable. It can seem like breast cancer is just a normal part of life for women. But breast cancer is not a rite of passage of womanhood, and we cannot let breast cancer be seen as inevitable because it's not. Next slide. Many cancers are complex disease, and breast cancer is a term used to describe a cancer that originated in the breast, but it includes an array of subtypes, each that have very different biology, molecular drivers, etc. But one thing that is important to understand is that most breast cancers can take decades to develop. And this is because the breast is one of the only organs in the human body that continues to develop over the course of a woman's lifetime. Researchers understand now that exposures to harmful chemicals at critical windows of development can affect risk many years later. Exposure to toxic chemicals during these periods of rapid development and growth can change the structure of the breast, making it more susceptible to cancer with subsequent exposures and damage later in life. And I'll plan to talk about this a little bit later. Next slide. So this is always a shocking slide for folks. When Breast Cancer Action was founded in 1990, the flyer called out this rising incidence in breast cancer in really a short period of time. 1964 is not so very long ago, and the lifetime risk for breast cancer was just 1 in 20. By the time Breast Cancer Action was founded, it was 1 in 9, and today it's 1 in 8. Next slide. So too little has changed over the last 30 years since the organization's founding, and I'm going to actually take time to go slowly through these statistics because they are so important. 30 years later, treatments still remain largely surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, with a handful of other systemic therapies. And, crudely, that's referred to as slash burn poison. Breast cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death among women in the U.S., and it accounts for 1 in 3 cancers that are diagnosed in women. It's the most common cancer after skin cancer for women, and here's something that few people realize. Even breast cancers that are diagnosed early can go on to spread or metastasize, and it's estimated that as many as 20 to 30% of all breast cancers may metastasize. Yet we still don't know what causes most breast cancers. Next slide. For all these pink ribbons, there's an awful lot of misinformation and misunderstanding out there. Why is the push for awareness so very disconnected from these important facts about breast cancer? And I think it's because good marketing relies on simple, pithy, catchy slogans. It doesn't allow for complexity. And it means that to sell pink ribbon products, companies need to sell simple narratives, simple stories, simple solutions. A lot of people are making a lot of money off of breast cancer. And they tell us to get a mammogram, but they're not talking about the ways that those mammograms are failing to save lives, and the fact that each year tens of thousands of women are overdiagnosed and overtreated for cancers that are not and never will be life-threatening. So it's not saving lives, and yet it's producing a lot of harm in the form of overdiagnosis and overtreatment. Believe me, if mammograms work, we would be the first there to, champion them. We're told to fight hard, to fight like a girl, to stay positive. But what does that say to the women who died? Did they not fight hard enough? Next slide. So here are some of the mainstream awareness movement. Here's some of the messages that we're told about breast cancer. And when you look at these, we're basically being told that it's our job to prevent our own breast cancer. But even women who supposedly do all the right things can still get and die from breast cancer. Next slide. The fact is we still have a lot to learn about the root causes of breast cancer and how to prevent the disease. What we know accounts for less than half of all breast cancers. And I listed just some of the commonly known established risk factors here. A lot of folks are really surprised to see that BRCA mutations are not a factor for most breast cancers. In fact, they account for less than 10% of all breast cancers, and only around 1 in 500 people in the U.S. have an inherited BRCA mutation, which are these mutations that can increase the risk of breast and some other cancers. On the other hand, you may notice that some of the known risk factors here are not modifiable. We're always told that we can prevent breast cancer by controlling postmenopausal weight gain and not drinking alcohol. But what about things like how tall we are, or when we start or end our periods, or our birth weight when we were babies? It turns out the main risk factor for breast cancer is being a woman and aging. I have to say that aging sure is better than the alternative. Next slide. Even though being a woman is the number one risk factor for breast cancer, it's important to recognize that the disease impacts different communities differently. For many years, white, middle, and upper-class women had the highest incidence of breast cancer, and it's a dubious kind of equity that now black women have caught up to white women in terms of incidence of the disease. But, the fact that this socioeconomic kind of distribution of the disease is different from other diseases like diabetes or lung cancer, that's in terms of incidence, but it doesn't change the fact that women of color are significantly more likely to die of their disease. They experience worse morbidity, worse mortality. They're often diagnosed at younger ages with more aggressive forms of breast cancer. And as we look at this data on the disparities in breast cancer, and the fact that black women are 40% more likely to die of breast cancer than their white counterparts, it's really important to remember that these disparities stem largely from deep social and economic inequities. And I want to pause to address the common concern that it's access to mammograms that account for these differences. But in fact, for better or worse, after decades of focus on awareness and screening rates are different. Screening rates are very similar among women of different races and ethnicities. In California, black women are actually screened at higher rates than white women. And we know that screening rates alone cannot account for these differences in death rates. Next slide. I added some information on Alaska Native and American Indian women. And these statistics are just so sobering. In Alaska and the Northwest, the rate of breast cancer is higher among Native women than among white women. Breast cancer accounts for 28% of all Alaskan and Native American women's cancers. And as with Black women and Latino women, Native women are more likely to be diagnosed at younger ages and later stages with breast cancer. Unlike there has been some very, very modest improvement in death rates for white women, but the death rates for breast cancer are not declining for American Indian and Native Alaskan women. And we know that American Indian and Alaska Native communities are among the most underserved groups in the United States. Next slide. So let's turn to the companies that are claiming to help when it comes to breast cancer. What you can see on this slide are all real products. And I just, there are no words for the pink breast cancer handgun. But when we saw those pink buckets for a cure, we asked, what the cluck? Alcohol raises the risk for breast cancer, so I don't know how a pink ribbon martini glass is going to help things. That perfume that you see that was distributed by the world's largest breast cancer charity, was commissioned by Komen. It contained hormone disruptors and other chemicals of concern until it was pulled after our campaign, after we've shown a light on the hypocrisy. And the same for the yogurt, which up until our Think Before You Pink campaign was produced using a synthetic growth hormone. Next slide. There is a strong body of evidence linking chemical exposures to breast cancer risk, as well as other cancers and health harms. And I know I don't need to tell most of you on the call this, that's largely how you got here. Carcinogens in our air and homes, hormone disruptors in our food packaging and personal care products, chemicals that we're exposed to throughout our lives. And while even the most diligent purchasing can't protect us from these exposures, I think it's important to say that the same chemicals that may increase the risk of the disease may also interfere with the efficacy of treatment. So there's some lab data that shows that, for all the concerns around BPA, if you take cells exposed to BPA, it interferes with the efficacy of tamoxifen, which is the most common breast cancer treatment. Next slide. So there are certainly still those who try to deny the environmental links to cancer, but this is increasingly accepted and widely recognized. And 10 years ago, the President's Cancer Panel released this really important report on the links between environmental exposures to chemicals in a range of cancers, including and not limited to breast cancer. And this report was really, it signaled an alarm, and it included an urgent call to action. It's been interesting to see Dr. Margaret Kripke, one of the co-authors, shift the focus of her work to really highlighting her concerns about these environmental exposures and the need to take action. Next slide. So it's going to seem like a transition, to see this slide around, on energy, on fossil fuels. And in recent years, Breast Cancer Action has been working to stop fracking and dangerous drilling. People absolutely ask me why a breast cancer organization works on what they see largely as just a climate change issue. But dangerous drilling, including fracking, uses hundreds of chemicals, many linked to breast cancer. And we know that tens of thousands of gallons of chemicals are pumped at extreme pressure underground to release oil and gas. And these chemicals, again, include carcinogens, neurotoxins, hormone disruptors, plastics, and also heavy metals and radioactive agents that can get dislodged from deep underground. We know that a quarter of the chemicals used in fracking and other forms of dangerous drilling can cause cancer. About a third affect our hormone system. And again, I remind you that breast cancer is a hormone-driven disease. Nearly half of these chemicals affect the immune system, heart health, other sensory organs, and like eyes and skin, as well as respiratory, gastrointestinal symptoms. So just to give one example, benzene is used in fracking and dangerous drilling, and benzene is not only a known carcinogen, it has been linked to male breast cancer. So think about what it takes to give men breast cancer. And benzene has been found at very high levels in the bodies of workers. There is no known safe level of benzene exposure. So we see that the entire process, from drilling to the disposal of fossil fuel waste, is toxic. These chemicals can't be contained. They don't biodegrade. They don't go away. And they're polluting the water we drink. They're getting carried across the air, across borders and boundaries. They're seeping into the soil. In California, our agribusinesses are sometimes using the wastewater that is, basically diluted and distributed on fields to grow food. At every stage, fossil fuels are fueling cancer, from production to disposal, from combustion engines and air pollution to plastics and other byproducts. And I want to pause to say that last year the U.S. became the #1 oil-producing country in the world, surpassing Saudi Arabia and Russia. That was unimaginable just a few years ago, and it's the result of these extreme extraction technologies. And, there is a lot of attention on climate change right now. We do have to take action now, not only for the health of our planet, but also for the health of our bodies, our communities, our future generations. We need to take action to stop further contamination of our air and our food and our water. Next slide. So we know that pretty pink ribbons alone are not going to stop the breast cancer epidemic. They're not going to prevent frontline communities who are the first and worst exposed. We know that pink ribbons are not saving lives. And at Breast Cancer Action, we say action speaks louder than pink. Next slide. So, I wish I could give you one simple solution. It sounds so nice just to say, buy this pink ribbon product and all will be okay. But the answer is, the truth is that addressing and ending the breast cancer epidemic is hard, it's complex, it's going to take time, and it requires systemic change. We just are never going to be able to shop our way to good health. Most of our individual body burden of chemicals is outside of our control as consumers. And without comprehensive chemical reform, we are doomed to play this game of whack-a-mole with a constantly moving target. We really, we must hold our regulatory system to account when we see it failing. And that's both, the EPA and also the FDA when it comes to treatments. The sad truth today is that I'm sure we all know women who did all the so-called right things, lived healthy lives, and still got breast cancer. It is past time to stop blaming women for their own cancers and to take action to make sure that more women aren't diagnosed. So, next slide. Breast Cancer Action is not in the pocket of the cancer industry, and it means that we can do the work that other organizations can't do. I'm going to...
Can't hear it.
Hello? I'm moving to the next slide. So, disrupting the cancer industry. This is a slide with a number of our past Think Before You Pink campaigns, and I'm really proud to tell you that our members have helped us not only call out the exploitation and hypocrisy and profiteering and misinformation that's rampant in so much corporate pink ribbon marketing, but we've actually helped to change corporate behavior and gotten multi-million-dollar companies to clean up their act so that Yoplait stopped using RBGH in their yogurts, and Dannon followed suit. Komen stopped their, pushing out this commissioned perfume. So, it's certainly not the case that we win all of them all the time, but you can learn more about these campaigns on our website or the Think Before You Pink website. And on the next slide, I have this image from a few years ago that you may remember, the pink fracking drill bit. Samantha Bee, when she was on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, did a segment on this. We have a clip on our website, or you can just Google it. And that is my teaser for you to stay tuned for this year's Think Before You Pink campaign. We are all fired up here in the office about another egregious example of pinkwashing, another company that's telling us how much they care about breast cancer, and yet their products contain chemicals that can increase the risk of the disease. And as angry as we are at this corporation, we're also hopeful because we can see that there's an opportunity to demand real change when we come together. We think, this is change that is meaningful, and we think we do have the opportunity to stop an exposure to a really harmful chemical linked to breast cancer and a whole host of other health harms. So we will be launching on October 1st. And next slide, I hope that you'll join us and sign up for Action eAlert so that you can be the first to know, and then follow us on social media so that you can stay up to date with ongoing news, including campaign memes. And again, a lot of that's available on our website from past campaigns to get you excited and help you see. There's so many things to shout about and rail against right now, but I do think that we have this track record of pushing companies, turning the PR on its head of these companies that are telling us how much they care about breast cancer, and we're really holding them to account to say, if you really care, you will not expose us to chemicals that can increase the risk of the disease. And this is my final slide. We are stronger because of you, and I am so grateful to the support of all of our members and everyone who takes the time to speak out and raise their voice. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yamini, who's
wonderful. Thank you, Karuna. This is Diana, and I'd like to welcome and introduce Dr. Yamini Ranchod, an epidemiologist and board member of Breast Cancer Action. As she will tell you, Yamini was diagnosed with breast cancer at the age of 31 while completing her PhD, and this led her to connect with individuals and organizations who shared her drive to support and improve the lives of women at risk of and living with breast cancer. She is especially interested in the role of the environment on breast cancer risk and disparities in breast cancer risk, treatment, and survival. She joined the board of Breast Cancer Action in 2018 and also serves on the board of Bay Area Young Survivors. Yamini received her Bachelor of Science in Economics and Biology and her doctorate in epidemiology from the University of Michigan and her Master's of Science in Epidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health. Yamini completed her postdoctoral training at UC Berkeley. Welcome, Yamini. You may go ahead and begin.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you so much for inviting me and having me. I'm really looking forward to telling my story today and in Alaska as well. And so as Diana mentioned in the introduction, I'm an epidemiologist by training, but this is not a scientific talk. I'm here to tell you my personal story about being diagnosed with breast cancer and kind of my journey and where I've come to. And so in the beginning, and I want to say there's an outline for those of you who've downloaded that, and that was really just, I had written that up so that people who were downloading it before the call would have a sense for the kinds of things I was going to be talking about. But I'm really just going to be telling a story, and so I hope you will listen instead of really following along in the outline. It'll be a little more organic to just kind of hear what I'll be talking about. So in 2010, in the summer of 2010, I had just taken my oral exam. I was 2 years into my PhD program, and I had met this wonderful man. We were backpacking in Turkey and hiking up to these beautiful travertines in Pamukkale, where we were both taking much needed break. And he proposed to me there, and we had this wonderful vacation. And that night, when we were going to sleep, he had his arm around me and kind of felt under my arm what felt like a little lump. And I had noticed that before, and I had kind of felt it, and I said, oh, it doesn't feel concerning. I have fibrous breasts, and I ran through in my head whether I thought it could be something concerning based on what I know about breast cancer, which is quite a bit. And it didn't really seem to me like I had to worry about it because I was young. I had no real risk factors. I had no family history. So I'll just wait till I see my doctor in a couple of months and get it checked out. And he had felt it and said, what is that? And I said, well, it's been there for a couple of months, but I don't think it's too worrisome. I'm going to get it checked out this summer. And he said, I think you should go in and get it checked sooner than that. And so I flew home from Turkey and I went to see my doctor, and that started the cascade of events. And 3 weeks later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer on August 31st, 2010. Well, sitting at my favorite coffee shop in Ann Arbor, getting ready for the new term, where I would be starting back to fall and teaching and working on my dissertation. And so this kind of threw a big wrench into my plans, and also hearing the words, you have breast cancer when you're 31 years old, is really not something you can prepare for or know what to do about. And I was in the less than 0.5% of people who get diagnosed with breast cancer at that age. And so the first thing I thought was, why? What did I do? Because I couldn't think of an explanation. And we decided to drive home, and I lived about an hour away from where my parents lived, to share the news with them, which I knew would be devastating for them, since I didn't really have that much information. I had some basic pathology, but I didn't really know much about my stage or my prognosis. And while I wasn't able to take the time to process what to do, because all I could think about was, why did this happen and what did I do? And I went through my head all the individual level exposures, the genetics. I thought, I have no family history. I'm the first person in my family on either side to get any kind of cancer, at least up through my grandparents' generation. My grandparents lived well into their 80s. My grandfather just died before his 100th birthday. But I was the first person in my family to be born and raised in the US. And so that got me thinking a little bit. And then I thought, okay, physical activity. I exercised a lot. I was fit. I was a vegetarian. I never smoked a cigarette. And so I think I did everything right. But what about that late night eating in college, or the social drinking? I know alcohol is related to breast cancer. It became a little bit of an obsession to find out what I could have done to make this happen to me. I thought about parity, having children as early as a protective effect for breast cancer. And should I have gotten married young and had some babies before the age of 30 and breastfed them for long periods of time? Should I have not taken the birth control pill for that short time to help regulate those horribly painful periods I had when I was 19? Maybe I should have suffered through those. And there's a blaming and a shaming that came so naturally to me that I didn't know would. And now I know that many women do the same thing because of the kind of messages we get. Even though less than half of breast cancer is explained by these risk factors, it's still a very natural thing that many of us do because of the messaging. And sometimes it's not helped by the questions we get asked by other people when they find out, oh, do you have a family history? Are you a vegetarian? What did you eat? Did you smoke? Did you drink? And I think that sometimes those kinds of questions help people they're trying to understand, and sometimes it helps them to feel better as well, to think that, well, if I didn't do these things, or if I do these things, perhaps I have some control over whether I will get breast cancer or whether one of my loved ones will. And so it's very hard to accept that you don't have as much control over something as you think that you do. And I understand that feeling. And so once my genetic test came back negative, which I expected, I still struggled with wondering why I got breast cancer. And after a year of what Karuna referred to as slash burn and poison, I had surgery to remove my tumor. I had a lymph node dissection. I had chemotherapy. I had Herceptin for 1 year. I had 18 infusions, and I had a whole range of side effects. I had radiation, and then I had hormone therapy. And 9 years later, I'm still on hormone therapy. And so after a whole year of treatments that really took a toll on me physically and mentally, I moved to the Bay Area, where my fiance had moved for work to start a postdoc. And I found an organization called Bay Area Young Survivors, which was an organization for women diagnosed under the age of 45 with breast cancer. And I have been very involved with Bays and now on the board of directors. But one of the things I noticed over the last several years is how we are growing so fast that we can't keep up. And during the conversations we have, and I facilitate a lot of support groups around the Bay Area as well, everybody is talking about, why do we have so many different things that we've been exposed to and so many different ways that we live, yet all of us got breast cancer? It has to be something more than what we're doing. It has to be something more than genetics. And we were all asking these same questions. And we are not an organization that wants to grow. We would be happy if we could shrink, but we are growing at a very fast rate. And so we got to thinking, and I got to thinking about environmental exposures. And I'm not an environmental epidemiologist, but I've taken some classes. I studied some of that during my master's program. And I was digging back into my knowledge of the environment and risk factors for cancer, and specifically for breast cancer, and reading studies. And many of you are familiar with environmental risk factors for breast cancer. But I was thinking about the wide range of chemicals, and I'm not going to be getting into specifics here, but that act as carcinogens by causing DNA damage or mimicking the biological function of estrogen hormones, of the endocrine disruptors in our environment that interfere with hormonal regulation, and that they can have a big impact on the etiology of breast cancer, both by influencing its development and its progression. And I think Karuna had mentioned a little bit about mechanisms there that could be possible in terms of its interference with treatment. So there's lots of ways the chemicals in our environment can be related to breast cancer. And the scary thing for many of us was that these exposures are ubiquitous and they're impossible to avoid entirely. And some of the ones that people talk about or have heard about are parabens or phthalates or flame retardants or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, which are man-made chemicals which are persistent in the environment and in the human body and don't break down and can accumulate. And rather than focusing even on the chemicals, we think a lot about the products, the things that we're surrounded by that they are in. And we could spend the rest of this time listing the things that we are regularly exposed to that have these chemicals in them, like personal care products or toys or drinking containers or nonstick cookware, food packaging, carpets, electronic equipment, pharmaceuticals, and we could go on. And the widespread use means that these chemicals have been detected everywhere, in drinking water, in house dust, in air, in human milk. And it also got me thinking about multiple windows of development, which kind of exploded when I unexpectedly got pregnant with my daughter. So through all of my treatments, I never was able to fit in fertility preservation for a variety of reasons. And so I had been told that it would be very highly unlikely that I would be able to have children. But my husband and I, for whatever reason, we got lucky, and I found out I was pregnant with my daughter about 3 years after I was on hormone therapy. And so I went off hormone therapy, and while I was pregnant, I thought about chemical exposures during susceptible windows of development in utero, in puberty. And it made me even more determined to figure out what I could do to get behind this, to find out how I could influence or ask the right questions or get involved in a way that could help me answer the questions that I was having. And so as I was walking around with my daughter in my belly, I thought about, how do I protect her? How do I protect her now? How do I protect her in the future? How do I protect myself? So I'm here to raise her. And I had a really difficult time enjoying my pregnancy. And I still have a difficult time with parenting because I think so much about whether I'm going to be here and whether I'm going to be able to protect her. And there's this stress and this fear and this lack of control that comes up when you get this diagnosis. And this is also a topic that comes up often in our support groups. And sometimes we feel crazy. We feel like we're trying to figure out all the things that we can do to make sure we don't get cancer again, to make sure our loved ones don't, to make sure our children don't. And even though I'm a scientist, I still have a hard time accepting that, to just look at facts and accept that I don't have control. And so one of the things we all try to focus on is lowering our personal exposure. And so people ask me often, what do you do? I know you're worried about getting breast cancer again. I know you're trying to create an environment for your daughter that will protect her from getting breast cancer. What do you do? And so I say, well, relabel for personal products, for cleaning products. If the manufacturer won't disclose something, I ask, I push, I demand. And if I can't find out, I just say no. I cook with things my grandma would cook with. I avoid pesticides if I can. I run an air purifier when I bought something new. I use a water filter. And I avoid microwaving and plastic. When I couldn't produce enough breast milk for my daughter and had to stop breastfeeding early, and I couldn't find a formula in the US that I felt was good enough, I sourced one from Germany where the standards are higher. But not before I lost many nights of sleep over whether my lack of breastfeeding for a long time was not yet another reason I would be at a higher risk of getting breast cancer again. And this is all incredibly exhausting and sometimes expensive. And most people don't have this kind of time or the resources. And having the burden to protect yourself in this way also disadvantages those who are disproportionately affected by breast cancer. And the real problem is that while we can do our small part to lower our exposure, we really can't get our exposure to any kind of acceptable level because of how ubiquitous these chemicals are in our environment. And so I tell this story because there is a burden that many of us carry around that just shifted from the individual behaviors to then taking the personal responsibility of protecting ourselves from the chemicals in our environment. And this is just an impossible task. And it's just another element of the blaming and the shaming that happens with us, where we feel like, well, are we doing enough to protect ourselves? How can we do enough to protect ourselves? And this got me thinking of the spectrum of responsibility. And I included a figure that's at the bottom of this outline that just helps me personally to think about myself and my evolution and how I got past the fear. And this is just something that visually represents my thought process, which is that I think in a way I felt a little bit like powerless, and I feel fear because I know that there's an originator of this exposure, and regulation doesn't adequately doesn't protect our health from these environmental exposures. And we have these incredible watchdog organizations, and this is just one example of an organization that can hold regulators and the originators of these exposures accountable. And they can only do so much with limited resources and limited time. It's a hard job. And so then these exposures filter down to us at the individual level, and there's no way that we can completely protect ourselves from them. And it feels like a powerless situation. And as we sat around talking about these issues, we realized that we can turn our fear into outrage. That our discussions and my own discussions with my husband have helped me to think about, what can I do? How can I push this back in the other direction? How can I reclaim my power? How can I join the voices that are doing the hard work? And so my active mindset now is, how can I help? And what can I do to help the people who are doing the work to push back on the regulators and the originators of these exposures? And this helped me to reclaim some of my power, to stop feeling so powerless. And as I began to think, who has the burden to keep me and my daughter safe? It can't just be me. And as I began to recognize that I wanted to do more to get involved, I came across Breast Cancer Action. And I was really just looking. I was talking to people. I was looking online. I was trying to find, there must be somebody who was doing this work. And I was excited and energized that there was an organization that was not only already asking these questions, but was systematically rallying the troops to take action. And I knew I had to find a way to get involved. And so one of my first exposures to the work Breast Cancer Action was doing was around the Think Before You Pink campaign. And this helped me kind of segue into pink ribbon culture and how I perceive it and how many of my friends and baes perceive it. And it made the Think Before You Pink really made me feel like I was heard, like, oh, somebody gets it. Somebody gets that I feel this discomfort around Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I can't even explain it to myself what it is. And it's the messaging, it's the communication, it's the language, it's the culture. In bays, we talk about the feeling that tying a pink ribbon around breast cancer has, that the perception that it gives people that breast cancer isn't a huge problem. After all, women get treated, they can wear pink tutus and go for a run, and then everything is fine. My friend has a story where she was in a waiting room waiting to see her doctor about reconstruction, and the woman next to her had asked her something about why she was there, and she said, well, I had breast cancer. And the woman said, well, breast cancer is the good cancer. No one really dies from it anymore. And my friend was kind of shocked, and she knew the data, and she said, well, actually, over 40,000 women die from breast cancer every year. And this woman sitting next to her was surprised. And this isn't an uncommon view, and it's largely because of the kinds of messaging that's out there. And she said to her, well, you'll beat it. You look like a fighter. And that, again, is putting the onus on the individual. and that those who die have somehow lost their battle if they didn't fight hard enough. There's a lot of battle and war language around breast cancer that, again, puts the burden back on the individual. And I think a lot of this is well-meaning, but there's more that we have to do to get behind this culture to shift the way people talk about breast cancer. And the reality with breast cancer is that people die. And that's not a sexy topic. That's not something people want to talk about because it's a difficult thing to talk about. And when I have talked with some friends and I tell them what I'm going to talk about, they'll say, well, that's kind of morbid, isn't it? And I say, yeah, because it's true, it's real, and we need to have some counter messaging so that people understand what the truth is about breast cancer. And I've had many friends die over the past several years. And as an officer in Bays, one of my roles is to keep our memorial document updated. And I am entering a name and a date of death in there, every month or every couple of weeks. And sometimes that's what's really happening. Young mothers, people who are just starting out in school or their careers. The other thing about the pink ribbon movement is that it leaves an image that once someone is diagnosed and they get through their treatment, that they kind of ride off into the sunset. And a big part of the culture is showing images of women who are fighting strong, lots of this battle language and imagery, and even the use of the word survivor, which many people don't like. And it often excludes references to women with metastatic breast cancer. It rarely shows a woman who is tossing and turning with night sweats or massaging her joints from pain, from the side effects of hormone therapy. It doesn't show women struggling to find words or process information because of brain fog, or the mom of a toddler with her head down on the dining table while trying to give her daughter dinner because she was up all night with hot flashes and leg cramps. Cancer treatment leaves many of us struggling with its after effects for months and years after diagnosis. And I think there is a place for hope and for positivity, and that's a message that people need as well. But the thing is, putting a pink ribbon on something and believing that everything is solved, it feels good. And so it makes sense why people rally behind it, because it feels good for the person going through the process. It feels good to friends and family. And while there's a role for that, it's not at the expense of losing focus on what's really important. It shouldn't be for corporate profit. It shouldn't be at the expense of the steps we need to take to prevent breast cancer. There has to be more. And I have plenty of friends who have done things like do a run for me or buy a bracelet and tell me that they did this because they are supporting me. And that's okay. I don't get upset. And in fact, I feel so much love that they want to do something. And I think of it as an opportunity to open this conversation and to start a discussion and say, that's so wonderful that you want to help. Here's what's really going on. And here are some wonderful ways where you can put your time or your energy or your money. Because the truth is that getting behind a cause that isn't solved, that is a long-term commitment, that takes hard work, that is really hard. It's a lot easier to get behind something that feels like it's easy to support. And so that's why I'm really excited to have gotten involved with Breast Cancer Action. And the thing is really one of the things, and as with October coming up, is I facilitate support groups, and October is a difficult month, and it's difficult to see some of these messages, but it's really shifted my perception of Breast Cancer Awareness Month to a place where I can really have an influence on helping people rethink the pink. And so moving forward, I'm really excited to orient my life around acting as an ambassador, to help people ask the right questions, to help people demand answers, to help people figure out the best way that they can take action. And for myself and for others to think about, to rethink what prevention means. So we have to move beyond the mammogram and screening and to think about how to get to the root, to shift the burden off of individuals. And this isn't to say that we should all absolve ourselves of any responsibility. I think we would agree that we should try to live healthy lives insofar as we can. But it's about understanding that it's so much more than that, and that we need to get to the root of the problem. And this messaging isn't just relevant for advocacy and activist groups, but it's important for everyone, for researchers, for people in healthcare delivery, and for people who've been going through breast cancer. And for me personally, I hope taking action and demanding the changes we talked about is the reason I will get to see my daughter grow up, and that she has the best opportunity for a long and healthy life, that she and her generation don't have to inherit this breast cancer epidemic. And that one day, that years from now, the person responsible for entering names into the Bates memorial document has nothing to do. And this is my dream, and I think it's possible. So thank you very much for hearing my story.
Thank you, Yamini, for telling your story. I imagine there are people out there who would have questions or like to make comments. Either these questions can be directed at either one of our speakers or to both of them. And in order to participate, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please press *2 to unmute your line. And then it's helpful if you could just state your name, and if you're affiliated with an organization or an agency, let us know about that. And then when you're finished, if you could press *2 again to mute. Yes, hello.
Hello, my name is Bev. I'm in Wabashine, Ontario, Canada. I'm not part of an organization anymore because people with environmental sensitivities have a hard time organizing together. I wanted to ask if anyone has looked at working together with other organizations that are also environmentally linked disabilities or illnesses like diabetes, environmental sensitivities, asthma, neurological illnesses, or changes such as autism. I'm having word retrieval problems right now, so I'm only going to name those, but all of these environmentally linked issues, we need to be working together on that because it affects all of us. And we also need to get educated together. I mean, do we know whether the toothbrush you're using, which is plastic and probably has a plastic softener in it, is affecting us? Are we getting, something out of that? Do people realize now that organic vegetables and fruits are now sprayed with a fungicide in the United States, as well as the paraffin wax? I mean, I didn't know that. So it's very hard to avoid all of these chemicals, but they are at the heart of all of these issues.
Hi, so this is Karuna. So thank you for your question, Beth. And I just wanted to say kind of yes and. So yes, we really understand how hard it is for some communities to organize and to, it's interesting what you say about the chemical sensitivities. We've seen that for many years among metastatic breast cancer patients. You see that with lung cancer and pancreatic cancer. I'll say that at Breast Cancer Action, we never have put breast cancer above other diseases or disorders. And so where possible, we do work with other patient advocacy groups. The challenge is that across the board, most patient groups get the majority of their funding from the very industries that are profiting from and sometimes contributing to them. So, with our What the Cluck campaign with KFC, what did they do next? They went to donate to juvenile diabetes, right? Mm-hmm. You can see the conflict there. And I think most patient advocacy groups are really focused on very important psychosocial support, but because of their funding streams, in part, they're not able to go to the root of the diseases. And so we work with other watchdogs, and I also want to say we work with scientific partners. And so, there are an enormous number of groups doing really important work, and I count CHE and ACAT among them. And none of us can do this on our own. And so what we're really trying to do is each bring our own organizational strengths to build a larger movement. And it would be wonderful to see more, patient advocacy groups at the table.
Thank you. We do have about 5 more minutes for discussion, and then I have a few final remarks. So I would like to invite others who may want to ask a question or make a comment. Please press *2 to unmute your line.
Hi, this is Elizabeth Mooney. I live in Kenmore, Washington, near Seattle, and I'm part of an organization, PERC, People for Environmentally Responsible Kenmore. We right now have an artificial athletic turf field being proposed in place of a grassy field that's a wetland headwaters for a little salmonid stream that doesn't have fish in it right now. And it's hard to know how to break into the big lobbyists that are for healthy athletics after dark to promote baseball and soccer. And so it's also hard to know how to get around the stigma of being an alarmist and telling people you shouldn't use Teflon pans. So I don't know whether there's some kind of a little book that can go out to, I don't know how to do it.
No, I mean, I have encouragement. It is hard. It's hard to be a lone voice. It's, this is Karuna. I am not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch. That is not my personal bent at all. And yet, when you see the interlocking economic forces, and you call those out, it can feel very alarmist, as you say. And so really, I think sometimes it can be lonely, but I think when you can find other like-minded people, you may not win all of them, but these are really important fights. And what I always feel like is it's important to, even if we lose, it's important to go down fighting, and we can win more than you can ever imagine sometimes. It's not linear, and it's important, and I applaud you for taking on the effort. Your community.
Thank you. I mean, I have definitely made friends, and it gets tiring, but we have a deadline this Friday to write to the park people to at least try to preserve and connect with the science behind not having these turf fields replace grass. But hopefully I'll just keep going. Thank you so much for having this. It is definitely encouraging to know there are people out there doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we are out of time for questions, but I did want to give both of our speakers an opportunity to make any last remarks that you might like to make before I close out the call.
This is Karuna. I feel, grateful to have started this conversation with folks. I think, it's part of larger work and larger conversations, and I look forward to continuing that with many of you going forward. Thank you for joining today and for the opportunity to speak with you and to come up to Alaska.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, and also for this opportunity. I think it's really great to be able to speak to a group of people who are all really interested in this topic and who are all going out and doing amazing things with it. So I'm really excited to be a part of it, and also excited for our visit to Alaska.
So on that note, your visit to Alaska, I did want to let everyone know, especially those of you living in the greater Anchorage area, please come to our public event with Karuna and Yamini at the Wildemarson Theater at the Lusac Library. It'll be next Thursday, September 5th. We'll have a reception at 6 p.m. followed by their talk, which begins at 6:30 and would go to about 8 p.m. And the event is free and open to the public. So please tell your friends, your neighbors, and your colleagues to come listen to these amazing women speak. And I'm sure that they will also have an opportunity for questions and discussion at that event. Let's see. Again, just thank you to everyone for participating today. This conference call was recorded, and there will be a recording posted to our website. I'll send an email out when I have that ready. So anyone who signed up for the call will be receiving that announcement. And finally, I hope you'll consider making a donation to Alaska Community Action on Toxics to support our monthly Che Alaska calls. Your contribution in whatever amount is right for you will help provide the support we need to keep providing these calls every single month. You can give online at akaction.org. And thank you again to everyone who joined us this morning. Have a wonderful day.
you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.